do you want to just give us an idea of your background and how you got into this position with the RMP?
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty much 1 year to the day in this role, which has gone very quickly. Prior to this, I worked with England Cricket for just shy of 6 years, from 2017 through to 2020, end of 2022. I originally started with the men's and women's teams there. I then ended up working with the men's team. Prior to that, I was with Northampton Saints, so I actually started out in rugby 10 years ago, which seems like a lifetime ago. I've come full circle. And then in the middle of all that, I also did some Olympic sports. I worked with Great Britain Hockey and was with them for 2 Olympic Games through 2016 and 2020 in Japan. So a bit of a mix in terms of variety of sport, but always worked in team sports my whole career.
And how does this team compare, let's say, to the one that you worked in 2019 and their achievements? How do the two environments compare or contrast?
I mean, obviously, I can't comment on the 2019 team. I wasn't there. I think this team are unbelievably, professional in their standards. It's very different working in rugby to working in other sports. If that was your question, cricket is a completely different game to rugby, so it's been quite a transition to me coming back into rugby. But yeah, it's a brilliant sport to work in. It's very enjoyable, and they're a great team to work with, so it's good.
And just one more question for me. What's the most bizarre request you've got from a player, nutrition-wise, in the squad?
In this squad, I actually haven't had too many crazy requests. Other teams and other sports have had some very bizarre requests.
Go on.
Nothing too out there. You sometimes get people wanting things like steak for every single meal that they have, as an example. But these guys are very straightforward. They love their food, which is good for me. It makes it easy. They're not fussy. My life is very simple in a way. They just like food and lots of it. That's basically the simple message that you'll hear from our camp.
Hi, Emma. Neil from RT. Can you give us an idea? You said you started off with the Northampton Saints about 10 years ago. How much has rugby and nutrition and rugby changed in those 10 years?
Hugely. I think it's hugely changed. If I look back then 10 years ago in the Premiership rugby in the UK, I think I was one of maybe 2 or 3 nutritionists working part-time 2 days a week. If we fast forward a decade, I think every team has at least a nutritionist, and they tend to be full-time. I work obviously full-time here with the men. I also lead a department of another 11 nutritionists across the Irish provinces, and the other Irish teams in terms of the women's team and the sevens. So I think nutrition as a discipline has obviously hugely grown. Also, you've seen a transition in terms of things like investments in chefs. We have 2 travelling chefs with us on this tour. I think that's the first time that we as Ireland have brought a chef with us. And a lot of teams you will now see do that as well. So I think nutrition has massively progressed in the last decade. And also just the investment in time into it, as I just described, from being part-time roles to now full-time roles.
We often hear from coaches about the challenges of coming in late in a World Cup cycle. As I said, you're pretty much here 1 year to the day.
Yeah.
Have there been challenges in just finding out what people's routines are and what people like and dislike, or have you been kind of reluctant to make too many changes this far through a World Cup cycle?
Yeah, it's funny because we say a year and it doesn't sound a long time, but a year in my eyes is actually the opposite. It's quite a long time to make change if you need to. My predecessor did a phenomenal job. She was in the role for 16 years. She had a lot of processes put in place already. So for me, it was just almost fine-tuning some of that. I started right before the Autumn Internationals. I didn't make many changes. That was more just observing what we were already doing. And then just speaking to coaches, speaking to other support staff and trying to understand how we wanted to play, what type of game do we want to play, working with science and medicine to see, how do we want to develop the players. And then we started in the Six Nations to probably make some more specific details to our adjustments in terms of nutrition. But in a way, I feel like I've been in this team a long time. That what's good for me is players buy into it. It's not been a challenge on that front. So we've made, hopefully some good progression more than anything, rather than adjustments is I think the main thing.
And can you give us an idea, using last week's game against South Africa as an example, like in the days leading up to and the days after a game, like what sort of calorie counts are we looking at? What sort of things are players fueling themselves with?
Yeah, I think one, it depends who it is. You know, I
Let's
think
talk front row forward.
Yeah.
There are more.
I think a lot of people assume that they all eat the same. It really depends on who's playing, what position they're playing, how many minutes we anticipate that they'll play. But ultimately, our week is pretty structured. So we'll have, you know, that we'll start to we periodise them through the week. So our heavier days tend to be Tuesday, Wednesday. We'll make sure the calories are high. We then drop off on a Thursday, it's our travel day, but the match day -1, we call it, is a huge day for us. That's almost the day that we really, really focus our attention in terms of their eating patterns. And, you know, a typical day will be breakfast, mid-morning snack, lunch, mid-afternoon snack, evening meal, pre-bed. Like, they have 6 opportunities to eat through the day. And I will work with the individual to say what their needs are. But yeah, it's massively important, and I'm fortunate that the team around me, the coaches in particular, are really supportive of that. So we will make our schedules support our fueling opportunities and our recovery opportunities, and hopefully that shows in a game like South Africa, where there's a huge amount of collisions, there's a huge energy demand, and that's where, for me, my side really comes into play when, you know, we want to be winning games in the last 10 minutes, and hopefully we will. So.
And after the game?
After the game's massive. I think all teams would agree, tournament rugby, you've got to win 7 games to win a World Cup in a relatively short space of time with only 1 week off. So our recovery starts as soon as they ideally hit the bench, if we can, but certainly when we get into the dressing room. And, you know, the other day we got back to the hotel at 1 a.m, the guys are eating a post-match meal. They have to, because there's no other time to eat. So, but they're very diligent. We prioritise eating and sleeping, and we try and get them back to baseline as quick as we can for the following game the next week. So weeks like this are a bit easier when we have a bit more time, but we're pretty aggressive with our recovery strategies, as you need to be, particularly for the guys who played 80 minutes.
The 9 o'clock kickoff, does that present its own challenges?
Yeah, very much so. I think there's also a psychology to a 9 o'clock kickoff, that for many players, we obviously try and push our day as best as we can. But for some players, we try and divide the day into 2. So they almost get up, eat, they may sleep, and then we start almost again their fueling routines. Sometimes it's challenging for overeating and feeling sluggish, because the only thing you do is eat all day.
Yeah.
So we have to really tailor it and manipulate that to what their needs are. We've done a lot of work in that space, actually, particularly with individuals, in terms of making sure that they feel good going into the game with it being so late. But it absolutely presents a challenge. It's something that we're not unfamiliar with. They're used to playing at 8 o'clock, obviously, occasionally, but when you're trying to prep the entire day, it can feel like a very long day when they're just sat, obviously, waiting to play. And food is one of the only things to do.
And you talk about the role of supplements as well. I know you've at least one vegan in the squad who probably needs a bit of help with certain elements. Like, how much do the lads kind of embellish or enhance what they're doing with kind of, I don't know, protein or all sort of thing?
Yeah, we're very much food first. I think, you know, of all the sports I've worked, people always assume that rugby is very supplement heavy. It's really not. It's actually really not. We probably use 3 or 4 supplements at max, and the majority of players will get the majority of things through their diet. We will screen them, and obviously if there was anything that they may be deficient in, we will rectify that, but ultimately we'll try our best to get what we can, and then we'll, you know, we see it as a cherry on top rather than the other way around. And yeah, there would be standard supplements that we would use, and it might be towards dietary preferences or requirements, but we're actually pretty minimalistic, a lot more than you would think that we would be.
Just going back to, you know, you've been for your time with Saints, has the buy-in changed from players over that period of time? You said they were very easy to deal with, this squad. Is that just a question of the way the game's moved on in that period of time?
I think so. I think there's also, you know, working with these guys at international level, we all see week in, week out the physicality and how much the game has developed, and the type of game that I suppose we play. And when we're facing certain opposition, every collision, it creates a further energy demand. But, you know, the time that the ball's in play will have an influence on, obviously, the fueling strategies that we do. So I think there's a natural player buy-in because they feel it, they experience it, they know what they need to do to fuel for 80 minutes. And I say to them all the time, like, I'm interested in how are we looking in the last 10, 15 minutes of the game, because that's really, for me, where my area kicks in with them. And we never want to have an excuse where we're not winning a game because we're underfueled. So I think there's a natural buy-in anyway as to what they need to do. But I think one of the biggest things they've seen a difference in is our recovery, how much better hopefully they feel in a shorter space of time, because we've got so good at, in our recovery especially. And if they obviously start with a full fuel tank and they only slightly deplete it, it's much easier to get them back to a baseline than if they start obviously slightly under. And that's not for performance. There's also minimising injury risk, keeping them fresh, minimising their illness. I think a lot of people just see nutrition as food. Hopefully my role spans way beyond that, and hopefully we see that in our results as well.
I'll just ask you one more bit. You mentioned aggressive, like in terms of the way you start. Is that just purely over a period, like a time-related aggression, or what does it mean?
Yeah, so I think if we didn't have a game the following week, we wouldn't be as aggressive in that strategy. Whereas if we've got to turn them around pretty quickly and get them back, as I said, for another game within 5 or 6 games, if we hopefully progress in this tournament, we could have shorter turnarounds. So that those windows immediately after become much more critical to us. So I would slightly adjust, and they will probably see me slightly shift in my mood around them in terms of how much I'm onto them. Come on, guys, we need to be on this. Versus we may be a little bit more relaxed if we've got more time within that space. But ultimately they all know our routines. I don't actually have to do a lot of work. I set it out for them. They come in, they do what they need to do, and then we manipulate the week as we go on, depending on what's ahead of us.
So what is it waiting for them in the dressing room after a game? It again depends on who it is.
Yeah, it does depend. A lot of guys don't want to eat immediately after games. I think, I'm yet to find a rugby player who wants to sit down immediately after coming off the pitch and eat a full-on meal. A lot of them, we look to fluids, we look to alternative methods to get calories back into them. And then we almost stagger our recovery, so they'll naturally go and have a post-match meal, as I said, which is a little bit further on. If it's not a 9 o'clock kickoff, we may then eat again and again, but it really depends on the time of, obviously we've got to prioritise their sleep as well. So in the dressing room, it's no surprise. A lot of teams do similar things. We'll do something along the lines of a drink, and then we'll start to implement some food when they feel like it and if they can. So.
Sorry, just last 2 questions. Sinead, then out.
Well, and just you mentioned kind of different players in different positions. When you're talking to someone like Andrew Porter or Prop playing against the box 75 minutes, what's that calorie intake like before a game?
Yeah, huge. We tend to, rather often people want to know calories. It depends on their body weight and other factors. But as an example, he would be looking to eat 400, 500, 600 grams of carbohydrate within itself. If you think one plate of pasta might be 80 grams, we're talking a huge amount. And generally, all guidance around nutrition will be based on body weight, so it's all individualised to what the play would be. But for somebody like, Ports, who's going to play high minutes, all being well, yeah, he's fantastic. He does an amazing job with his nutrition, and it's very, very detailed to make sure that he goes in, as we said, ready and fully fueled, and hopefully able to play 80 minutes should he need to. So, see ya.
And then Rory, going to finish up.
Hi, I've obviously here to the Travel World Cup, and you were involved with the England cricket in 2019 in the World Cup. Can you talk a bit about those experiences and what that was like?
Yeah, sorry. So the Cricket World Cup.
Yeah.
Yeah, every World Cup or Olympics, they're all very similar. I think I took a lot of learnings from both of those environments with, the Olympic Games with hockey and the Cricket World Cup, more so in the nature of getting back to baseline, getting players ready to play again. I think, as I said, like with hockey, they had to win 7 matches in 13 days to win a gold medal. In cricket, very similar to rugby, you've got to be able to back up games potentially twice a week. I think it's been good experience for me because I'm used to the nature of the tournament and how it falls, used to getting players ready for a match, but then having to get them ready again is probably the main learnings. But also as well, just experiencing a World Cup, it's a long tournament, as well as it being obviously back to back. There's a long time to concentrate, keep players focused. I think a big learning for me is food is mood, particularly in these campaigns. So there becomes a point where, our guys here are brilliant. We'll have conversations. What type of food do they want? We obviously try to keep the quality good and of high quality all the time, but there'll be times where we obviously just go, let's just calm it a little bit and just give them what they want and relax, because that's also important when you're here for such a long time. We've been in pre-season since the middle of June. That's a lot of meals to prepare for. It's also hard to keep people occupied with food. It's often the one thing, internet, food and sleep seem to be the three things that keep people happy. So I think, my learnings from all campaigns that I've worked in around these tournaments is make sure the food is really good. We're so fortunate to have our two chefs with us who I said do an amazing job, but also communicate with what people want and need, and try and keep everybody in camp happy in that space. And I think we do that well here.
Any similarities?
Sorry, yeah.
Ben Stokes and Johnny Sexton?
Sorry, I can hear you.
Any similarities between Ben Stokes and Johnny Sexton?
Oh, I did. Fantastic captains. That would be the biggest thing I would say. Yeah.
Anyway, it's all Morgan, by the way. Go on.
Now it is.
It was on.
Oh, it was. Ben was there as well. He was, yeah.
Just there's a picture gone viral this week of Connor and Peter enjoying a glass of rosé, and obviously the lads had a couple of days off. They'd often have a beer in the change room, and it's a long tournament. I think rugby's a fairly mature relationship with alcohol. But what impact will it have, or how does that affect when does your role kick in terms of the lads letting loose a little bit and then kind of performance focused again?
Yeah, I think we don't have rules. We have standards, and the lads know those standards. They create those standards. My job's really easy in that space. They know they're very professional. They also need to look after their own bodies. I think we're very clear on, they know the time. They know the time when they can slightly relax, as I've just alluded to. We can do that with food. They can do that if they want to have a drink. But they also understand what's ahead of them. So there's a trust either way, there's a respect. And I think what's really nice in this environment is, as I said, we don't say you can or cannot do that. They do things at their own discretion, and we all understand what we're trying to achieve. We're all on the same page with that. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. They're back in, we're ready to go for the next game, and I'm sure that will continue in this group.